So folks, here's another video that is what California School Board changing their history curriculum on teaching Black history. Now saying that they're going to teach that slaves benefit from slavery. The skills the Black people eventually I guess this is in the people that the slaves or the slaves benefited from slavery. They develop skills or whatever. So now they're going to teach that in the schools in Florida, school board, and that's a horrible take. It's a horrible thing to do. They're so against critical race theory that wow. But they're doing this. Comes into an effect. The point of me making this video is not to show this, really to show how this is like a whitewashing of history. This is, but to show I'm showing what TYT is saying, that it's a whitewashing of history, is an outrage. But they're doing the same thing. Kind of after this, they're speaking about this. Then they go back to the civil rights movement. And they're saying that there wasn't no violence in it and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't violent, or there's no violence. They didn't advocate violence, in which they did not. Martin Luther King did not, but they even referenced other people in the movement. Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, they kind of did advocated violence, and there was violence against Black people. They mentioned the bombings, race riots, and Rosewood and Tulsa, and other places where white mobs attacked the Black people and destroyed their houses, their cities. But then they failed to mention the lynching also. They just Black people, randomly kill Black people, like lynch them. They hung them on trees and burned them alive. And right now it is, they're still doing that in a way. There's still lynchings and we don't really hear about it. Yeah, I mean. And there's sundown towns you can't go to. You're a Black person in America. You can't go to, you get killed. If something happens to you, get beat up, killed by the cops and all. Still getting killed by the cops. You know what I mean? And yeah, this thing is so they're saying that the civil rights movement wasn't violent at all, or wasn't violence. There wasn't any violence, but so they're saying that Florida Education Board is whitewashing history, but they're doing the same thing in a way. They're whitewashing history. The civil rights, with the notion that the civil rights wasn't. He was all this. Martin Luther King wasn't all this radical. He's doing what the left. He's doing what the right wing is saying about Martin Luther King. Saying he's a perfect guy. He wasn't a radical. This and that. And Martin Luther King was a radical figure back then. And most of the public hated him. Most of the white population hated him. 55% back then, I heard, poll like that. And they hated the civil rights movement. Most white folks back then. And some today regretted it. So there you go on that. But let's see what else they're saying about it. These TYT, they're so-called leftists. Yeah, they're not really. They're true. Yeah, somebody call them pseudo-leftists. RBN Network. They would discover those guys. Coalition of White and Black People, Revolutionary Blackout Network. It's pretty good. Those guys are not too bad. I discovered them. And without the culture war, I listened to them. You know what I mean? And they're like for the workers. You know what I mean? I guess they're trying to start a revolution politically, but they're trying to do real change. And these guys are just, I don't know, so-called progressive network, TYT. I don't know, but he's more the story.
Skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit. A document listing the standards and posted in the Florida Department of Education website said. And we double-checked that ourselves, and that's what it says.
Yeah, so that is unreal, man. And there's another part of this that's unreal. And but I want to give you context first. Remember when the conservatives started this, and DeSantis and others did, where they said, oh, look, we just don't want critical race theory being taught in the schools. Now, there are parts of critical race theory that I totally agree with. And there are parts of it where I go, well, I'm not so sure about that. That some of those positions are debatable. Good news, that's why they're not taught in any schools across the country, high school or lower. They're taught in graduate level courses because there's controversial material in there, and it takes thought to wade through those issues, okay?
Good news, more like bad news, but...
But now, we're not a critical race theory anymore. Now we're just whitewashing history.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. And look, I took a step back.
That's what it's all about. It's all about teaching their history, teaching their way of teaching it, black history, not about teaching real history. That's what it's all about.
And I was like, look, obviously they're not teaching.
And this commercial's got to go.
Graduate level critical race theory in grade school. There's no way that's happening. But let me understand their argument, because maybe they're trying to argue that there are like traces of that curriculum in public schools, right? And if they genuinely believe that, how do you answer for the fact that they're trying to now input this like revisionist history about how, there were some positive elements of slavery if you really think about it? Like, this gives the whole game away. You get what I'm saying?
Exactly right, Anna. So I want to read graphics 2 and 3 because I think they're even more devastating. So CNN explained.
Yeah. She's saying this nonsense. But anyways, taking their side of this argument, there was advocate. It's pure nonsense.
When high school students learn about events such as the 1920 Ocoee massacre, the new rules require that instruction include, quote, acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. Now, already that's disastrous, okay? Why are you putting in those two things in the same sentence? Why are you conflating them? But wait till you see the context. The context is much worse. I thought when I read that, they were saying, okay, now look, there was the Tulsa massacre and all these massacres and the lynchings, etc. But don't forget, black people sometimes commit crimes. That already is terrible. Why are you mentioning that? So do white people, so do Asians. Why are you randomly mentioning that within the context of civil rights? But no, it's way worse. So here's the explanation. Instruction includes acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans, but is not limited to the 1906 Atlanta race riot, 1919 Washington, D.C. race riot, 1920 Ocoee massacre, and that happened in Florida. That's why they mentioned it earlier. 1921 Tulsa massacre, and the 1923 Rosewood massacre. So when you see that, and then I read the longer explanation of it too, just to be absolutely sure, they're saying that these acts of violence happen to African Americans and by African Americans in reference to things like the Tulsa massacre and Rosewood and these massacres of African Americans, the one that happened in Florida.
Can I talk about that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that particular case had to do with a black man by the name of Moses Norman. And he was a landowner in the community. This is in Florida, of course. And he decides, I'm going to go vote. I'm going to cast my ballot. He gets turned away by white poll workers. And then all of a sudden, he's eventually followed home by a mob of 250 people, white people, who killed dozens of African Americans. They set fire to their houses, just absolutely destroyed the community, drove the black community out of their own community just because this black landowner wanted to cast a ballot and vote in the election.
So now, given that context, and by the way, 60 people were murdered, and they not only burned down their homes, but this is also interesting, they went out of their way to burn down their schools. Okay, and that was all for voting. Now, in that context, they mention it as violence done to African Americans and by African Americans. Why are you blaming the victims in a scenario like this? Are you insane? How did that? It's almost like they're saying, well, you know, they had it coming. No, this is disgusting, man. This isn't anywhere near critical race theory. This is just Republicans saying, we don't really like.
It's nonsense. They don't really care about critical race theory. They just care about they don't want to teach. They just want to teach their own views. They don't really care, anyways, about black people. They don't want to see. They have to teach some history, so they just go with this. And if we read the realities, the thing is, they don't really want to teach any good real history. So they're going with this thing, going with this makeup revisionist history. But they don't really want to teach any history at all in terms towards the black Americans in the U.S.
Like black folks, and we just we vomit it out wherever we are. So I mean, look, you tell me, Republicans, you love DeSantis. You gave him a 20-point win in Florida. What the hell is this crap?
Well, look, there's something really interesting happening, and by interesting I mean abhorrent, and it has to do with this revisionism I'm seeing on, look, obviously in this case with the right, but also with some on the fringes of the left. And it's to rewrite history and make it appear as though the gains that were accomplished and won during the civil rights movement were done.
This is the part where she brings it up.
So by the implementation of violence. And I think that is inaccurate, to say the least.
Implementation of violence. Were there not violence in the civil rights era? There were violence. And people did try to commit violence. I mean Malcolm X said, all means necessary. You know what I mean? Which is a defense mechanism. I mean, like for black people, we're saying that they come after us, I'm gonna defend myself. They come up to my house, like Malcolm X, come after me, I'm gonna defend myself. We're gonna go down fighting. We're not gonna if they wanna wipe us out, we're gonna go down fighting. And the Black Panther Party too. We're gonna fight for our rights. We're gonna fight in politically or in the streets. Or physically, we're gonna fight. So there's a part of the civil rights movement that's not being told. And you're kind of whitewashing history by saying that it's only Martin Luther King. They're really like radicals. They really want to fight. They really do want to do violence back then. And but it's the white media. In the black media, they will talk about this. Actually, some of the black media would talk about this, but the general white media, even the left media, leftist white media, and the regular media, mainstream media, and the far right won't either. You know, they hate talking about this, but they won't talk about this. they talk about. They talk more. I think the right, on the right they talk about as a Martin Luther King as a conservative. He's a conservative. No race, freedom for all. I mean, freedom. He's no race, color, content of his skin. But actually, he's Martin Luther was King was a leftist. Some say he was a communist, a straight out leftist, and he was for workers. I mean, he was against the Vietnam War, and he was for the workers. The union. He's for the unions. White and black people or unions. I mean, he was for standing up to power structure, the corporate power structure. He's standing up for that, against that, and then he talked about the United States, the power structure, what's doing it. It's is doing all these things to people back then, and even now. I mean, all the racial divide. He talked about the poor, the black and the poor back then, the disenfranchised. You know what I mean? And he talked about the white liberals, like this, her, who say they're for civil rights and they're not. You can't count on them. They're not on. He would say they're not on our side. With the cozy little bourgeois. Maybe she's bourgeois, white person, or who, I mean, they're idealistic, but they don't really, you know what I mean, put their mouth word where the mouth is, or whatever. Those empty words, they're just platitudes, and you know what I mean. They're not really for. Oh, they're not really for equality because it affects them. It might affect them, their privilege, because they're part of the white privileged class, so it's gonna affect them. You know what I mean? If you give like minority or black people, it's more civil rights. It's gonna affect them, and it will. You know what I mean? In a way. Once it affects them a little bit, they don't like that. So even the liberals, white liberals. Wait, look what she says about this stupidness.
East, when we think about the leader of the civil rights movement, who do we think about? Martin Luther King Jr. Speech after speech, book after book, he makes his philosophy abundantly clear. And I want to give you just a short snippet of one of his speeches, but please watch the whole thing. Look it up online. It's readily available. Here's what his philosophy actually was.
We will never have peace in the world until men everywhere recognize that ends are not cut off from means, because the means represent the ideal in the making and the end in process. And ultimately, you can't reach good ends through evil means, because the means represent the seed and the end represents the tree.
So where's the violence by African Americans in this context? So here's Martin Luther King, the greatest civil rights leader, saying 1,000 times over, not only do we believe in nonviolence as an end, but as a means. We are always nonviolent, yet gratuitously the right-wingers put it in there as if African Americans had these massacres coming. And then some on the left now maniacally have started to say, no, Martin Luther King was for violence. Why are you helping right-wing framing when it's not anywhere near true?
He wasn't saying it was violent. He was saying there was violence in the civil rights movement. he wasn't for violence, but the others were for violence in the movement, and there were violence done against them. And but the church bombing of those kids, that was violent. You know what I mean? And the fire hose, and the guy was, what's his name? The senator, I forgot his name, was beaten. He died a couple of years ago. He was beaten bad. Like civil rights, I forgot his name. Yeah, he was beaten badly. That was violent. There were violence against them. To say that there wasn't any violence at all. But he didn't advocate in violence. His group didn't. But a lot of others that did. But maybe they were in the fringe. But not really. Malcolm X wasn't really in Nation of Islam. Like they weren't in the they're pretty big back then. So they advocated kind of. More like a self-defense thing. They advocated. We're gonna defend ourselves. You know what I mean? But to say that the civil rights, the total movement was for non-violent, I mean, it's totally I think it's in it. Well, I could even look it up. I'm pretty sure. And no, I looked at the history. You know what I mean? You can look it up, people. Just watching my video, you can look it up. There were violence. People who advocated violence. So it wasn't totally violent. I mean, totally non-violent. But you're doing false. You're doing whitewashing. You be doing what they're doing. Florida Board of Education is doing. It's silly.
Right? So, no, please get an education. Learn what Martin Luther King was about. And for the people in Florida now, when you go...
Not about King. King didn't advocate, you're right. But these other groups beside King wasn't about King only.
Tell them to get an education. This is what their public schools are teaching them now. And this is really a war against teachers. This is a war against history. It's a war against truth. It's absolutely Orwellian. And it's made extra Orwellian by the people who claim that they're for freedom.
Look, we can go on, including, talking about the individuals who are trying to pretend as though this isn't an attempt to whitewash history. It absolutely is. I just want to give you a few more details about this. So they lay out new benchmark clarifications to the existing Black history curriculum that critics say ends up watering down the history. So the changes include teaching elementary school children to recognize Rosa Parks and
Hold on. Teaching elementary school to recognize Rosa Parks as individual states. Okay. The Florida Education Association criticized the approach. Criticizes, saying it excludes a deeper teaching of their histories and struggles of easily. I don't understand that. I didn't know. So what?
Ms. Jefferson as individuals who represent the United States. The Florida Education Association criticized the approach, saying it excludes a deeper teaching of their histories and struggles in favor of easy identification and memorization. They also made sure to include how aggrieved the virtuous white people were in the 1800s. Instruction includes how whites who supported Reconstruction policies for freed blacks after the Civil War, white Southerners being called scalawags and white Northerners being called carpetbaggers, were targeted. So that's directly from the Florida State academic standards for 20.
This is all nonsense anyways. You could put that in, I guess. But there are, well, if there, you could put that, yeah. I guess with the call, yeah.
2023.
So look, I think the Rosa Parks criticism is legitimate. They should give you the context of why Rosa Parks was a hero, not just generically name her.
Really? I thought, didn't we know why she was a hero?
But at least they mentioned her as an American hero, and I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression that they're not teaching slavery or civil rights at all. They are. They're just doing this reframing of it as slightly black people's fault.
So she's a radical, I guess. And we see that maybe she's a radical. Well, I guess it's kind of a radical when what she did was radical, but she's just a common person to me. I heard about the history of her, and you know what I mean, I don't know the details fully, but I know more than, you know what I mean, a regular person that's we're not, you know what I mean. And I don't think she's a rat. They're trying to say she's maybe she's just trying to. I think they're trying to say she's a more of a radical past. She's a radical history. So they're trying to say about Rosa Parks, the Florida board. And they're saying that it's okay to look and make, well, okay it is, I guess, but they're trying to do that. Like she's a real radical. Like dangerous. Maybe she was a danger. That's what it feels like to me they're doing. And you're saying it's okay. They're saying it's okay, we'll see. Yeah. She's American citizen. They mentioned that. Okay, but still.
To me, the Rosa Parks thing is a legitimate complaint, but doesn't necessarily show their hand. But when they say,
it does. They'll show their hand because they're saying that they're trying to say, I'm not putting the words in their mouth, but they're trying to say she's a radical, more radical than this history is telling you. It was taught before. I don't think it's more that. I don't think it's that like that. Look on the issue. I don't think she's in that sense like that. Yeah, I mean, trying to make her more of a certain figure than a bad person. In a bad person, kind of. Or like she wasn't that heroic. You know what I mean? So.
Black people got all these benefits from being slaves. And by the way, the violence that was done against them was also kind of done by them. As Anna said, you're showing your hand.
Yep.
Now we know exactly what you actually think. Thanks for watching The Young Turks.
And I actually think this thing is stupid. And Young Turks, again, they're doing like a both sidism. Like, it's totally terrible. This thing is totally terrible in Florida. But it makes it, this video, once they said about on the left doing Black history, revisionists on the left doing Black history, and they're sort of agreeing with the other side, the right wing, the Florida board. You know what I mean? They're saying that, you know what I mean? They're, in a way, what they're doing what they're doing, whitewashing history. By saying there wasn't violence. You know what I mean? In the civil rights era. There's violence done against them, and some people did advocate violence. But they didn't go by. King did not do that, but others did. You know what I mean? Malcolm X, kind of. And but to say that these guys are changing, they want to teach terrible history, but then you're doing almost the same thing in a way. You're whitewashing history yourself. So now these guys are like, I don't know, really progressive, so-called progressives, TYT, or they bullshit. This guy's not really progressive. He's I don't know. He's democratic capitalist, he calls himself. Is that really progressive? Anyways, folks, this is a stupid thing, and this is but that's it for this video. Anyways, to the next video, folks.